In true Hideo Kojima fashion, it looks like Death Stranding is going to have a strong and a magnetic cast of weirdly named characters. And of all the characters that we've seen and learned about so far, do you know who's looking like the most interesting of the lot? Not the protagonist, not the man in the golden mask who can summon storms and supernatural monstrosities, not even the man with a cool-looking black mask with Die Hard in his name. No. The most interesting Death Stranding character is so far a dude named Cliff. Based on all that we've seen of Death Stranding so far, there is no character in the game who's as shrouded in mystery and intrigue as Cliff is. Played by actor Mads Mikkelsen, there's a lot of things about Cliff that have raised numerous questions. In fact, in the very first trailer we saw him, which was shown at the 2016 Game Awards, we saw Cliff with 4 skeletal soldiers, who are among the many mysteries attached to this character. Theories about Cliff and his 4 soldiers are a dime a dozen, but the one thing that keeps getting mentioned time and again is that somehow they're connected to the BTs. How exactly is that? Well, of course, we don't know that just yet. But Cliff, surrounded by his 4 soldiers, 2 on each side, is an image we've seen a couple of times by now, and it's quite reminiscent of something else we keep seeing in Death Stranding trailers: the 5 floating figures on the horizon who are perhaps the BT overlords. These soldiers are also connected to Cliff with cords that look a lot like the umbilical cords we've seen on the spectral forms of BTs. Yet another possible strand, no pun intended, of connection is the black oily liquid we keep seeing them in. In both the TGA 2016 trailer and the game's release date trailer, we've seen Cliff and his soldiers emerging from the thick oily liquid that floods the other side as well. And the other side is, of course, the realm of the BTs. Are Cliff and his soldiers a manifestation of the BTs in human form? Is Cliff somehow working with the BTs? What his connection to the BTs is something we can't answer yet, but there's no doubt that he definitely has a connection with the BTs. But it's not just BTs or his soldiers that Cliff has a strange connection with. He also has a connection with the Bridge Babies, or BBs. In the release date trailer of the game, we saw him speaking to a BB on 2 occasions, with both scenes bookending the trailer, and it's clear that he has some sort of a bond with the baby. And if there's one thing that we know after Dead Man's character spotlight trailer, it's that Bridges and everyone else don't see BBs as anything more than tools, and they find it easier to not get too attached to these babies. It's obvious then that Cliff and Bridges have some very fundamental ideological differences. Perhaps Cliff used to work with Bridges in the past, but after developing a bond with his BB and beginning to see things differently from the rest of Bridges, he went his own way? Perhaps his ultimate aim is to liberate Bridge Babies from Bridges' control, or something along those lines? There's other evidence to suggest his obsession with BBs as well. Right from the very first trailer we saw Cliff in, the TGA 2016 trailer, up until the last time we saw him in the release date trailer, we've seen Cliff surrounded by those weird, creepy baby dolls. We've seen it on numerous occasions, and we've been baffled by it every single time. But surely there's a reason for this, right? Is this some form of demented exercise to replace what he lost? Is he trying to artificially simulate the supernatural abilities of BBs? Is it something else entirely? We can't say for sure, but one thing is undeniable. Those baby dolls popping up every time we see Cliff is no mere coincidence. And keeping with the theme of connections, which is appropriate enough given the game that we're talking about, let's move on to something else that Cliff seems to have a connection with, and that's the game's protagonist himself, Sam Porter Bridges. This one is a little harder to put together because unlike his soldiers and the babies, we haven't seen Cliff and Sam together in any scenes so far. But looking at the arcs that the game seems to be setting up for both of these characters, one can't help but shake the feeling that the 2 characters might have more in common than what you'd initially think. Let's get one thing out of the way first. Cliff isn't exactly an antagonist. No, he's not a protagonist, and he's definitely involved in some shady stuff, but to call him an antagonist in this game might be a bit inaccurate. In fact, more than a couple years ago, Mads Mikkelsen himself said Cliff's character isn't a villain in the game. He's a character whose morality players and audiences can decide for themselves, but to straight up call him a villain wouldn't be entirely accurate. Now Higgs is a bad guy, there's no doubting that, but Cliff, that's a bit more complicated. It's possible that Sam and Cliff will end up seeing eye to eye on one thing in particular: BBs. In recent trailers, it's become clear that Sam too is developing a bond with his BB. In fact, in the Dead Man character spotlight trailer, Sam's displeasure at the fact that his BB won't stick around forever, and Dead Man's warnings to him that BBs are just tools that he shouldn't get too attached to, seem like overt attempts at setting up an arc that sees Sam growing distanced with Bridges on the basis of their viewpoints on BBs. In fact, recently Kojima said that though the Bridges aim to connect all of UCA together again, the game won't say whether that aim is a good one or a bad one. One reason for that might be along the lines of informational control and the authority that Bridges might exert over these cities, but perhaps the morals of their methods involving BBs might also call their actions into question. Do their ends justify their means? How Sam answers that question might define his relationship with not just Bridges but also Cliff. Oh, and another interesting side note, we've seen a similar cross-shaped scar on the stomachs of both Sam and Cliff. What exactly does it mean? Well, no freaking idea, but it's definitely interesting. Finally, the last thing related to Cliff that bears mentioning is the locations we've seen him in every time he's been shown in one of the game's trailers. Both in the TGA 2016 trailer and the release date trailer, the bulk of his screen presence has been in historic war locations, whether that's World War II or Vietnam. I think by this point, it's safe to say that these wartime recreations are somehow part of the other side, or Hades as the release date trailer called it. And other than the two scenes when Cliff was shown talking to a BB, we've seen him in these locations almost exclusively. That drives the point of his connection with BTs and the other side even further, but it also raises a ton of interesting questions. Is Cliff stranded in the other side? Is he there by choice? Is he even alive anymore? As we've established by now, there's a lot of stuff we don't know about Cliff. He's coming across as the most enigmatic and intriguing character in the entire game by far, and it's clear that he's going to be a major player in the story. What shape and form his role in the game takes, what his motivations are, what the nature of his character and his abilities is, all of these are big question marks. But without a shadow of a doubt, we can say that Cliff is going to be one of the most interesting parts of Death Stranding's story. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.